You are being pulled by two invisible forces every single day, and one of them wants to destroy you. You smile in public, but deep down, parts of your mind are at war, and you don't even know who's winning. Freud didn't just study the mind. He uncovered its darkest battlefield. Most people think they're in control of their thoughts, that what they want is what they truly want. But what if your deepest desires were never really yours? What if the reason you self-sabotage, lie, procrastinate, or feel ashamed after success isn't because you're weak, but because there's a psychological war going on inside you? Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, believed the human mind is divided into three forces constantly clashing for control: the id, ego, and superego. And you're just the battlefield. He exposed what no one wanted to hear, that even the most normal person hides urges so dark, so primal, society had to build an entire set of rules just to keep them buried. In this video, we're diving into Freud's theory, not the watered-down version, but the twisted, brilliant truth behind how your mind manipulates you. You'll see how his discoveries explain everything from guilt to addiction, from dreams to destruction. And by the end, you'll question whether you've ever truly been in control. If you're fascinated by the psychology behind your own thoughts and want to uncover what your mind has been hiding from you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more deep dives, and share this with someone who thinks they have it all figured out. Because what's coming next might just shake that belief. The birth of a war. Before Freud, most people believed the mind was just the mind, a single, unified self steering the ship. But in the early 1900s, Freud threw a grenade into that belief. He suggested that the mind isn't one harmonious unit, it's a fractured battlefield. And the you think you know? That's just the tip of the iceberg. Freud's famous iceberg model painted a chilling picture. The conscious mind, everything you're aware of, is a tiny sliver above the water. But beneath the surface lies a vast, unseen territory, the unconscious, a shadow world of desires, fears, and impulses you never chose, but which guide your every move. This wasn't just a poetic metaphor. Freud backed it up with case studies that rattled the medical world. One of his most famous patients, known as Anna O., suffered from paralysis, hallucinations, and uncontrollable emotions. Yet doctors found no physical cause. Under hypnosis, Freud uncovered repressed memories and emotions fueling her symptoms. The discovery was unsettling. The mind could create physical suffering to protect itself from emotional pain. Now imagine that multiplied by every person, every day, for their entire life. Freud argued that this unconscious realm was home to three powerful entities: the id, the instinct-driven child, hungry for pleasure, unbothered by morality or consequences; the superego, the internalized parent, demanding perfection, punishing failure with guilt; the ego, the negotiator, desperately trying to keep peace between the two. And here's where it gets dark. These forces don't politely debate over tea. They fight, relentlessly, sometimes subtly in the background of your daily life, sometimes violently, in ways that push you toward decisions you can't explain. Think about the last time you made a choice you instantly regretted. Part of you wanted it, another part screamed against it, and somewhere in the middle a you decided, but not without damage. That tension, that's the war Freud uncovered. The cultural backlash was immediate. Critics accused Freud of corrupting morality by exposing humanity's animal instincts. The church called his theories dangerous. But for those who dared to listen, his work was liberating because it explained why being a good person feels like a constant uphill battle. Freud's brilliance was in showing that we're not broken for feeling conflicted. We're designed that way. Conflict isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. By pulling back the curtain, Freud gave us language for our inner chaos. But he also gave us a chilling question to carry. If so much of our life is decided in the shadows of the unconscious, how much control do we really have? The id, your hidden anarchist. Deep inside your mind lives a creature with no patience, no morals, and no sense of time. Freud called it the id, but you might know it better as that raw, restless part of you that wants what it wants right now. The ID is pure instinct. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't weigh pros and cons. It's the same primal drive that kept early humans alive. The hunger that pushed them to hunt. The lust that ensured the species continued. The aggression that defended them from predators. In the modern world, though, this ancient force doesn't just vanish. It's still there, under your civilized exterior, whispering, and sometimes screaming, for satisfaction. Psychologists describe the ID as operating on the pleasure principle, the belief that all discomfort must be erased instantly, no matter the cost. It's the part of you that reaches for chocolate cake while you're on a diet, snaps back at someone when you promised yourself to stay calm, or scrolls for hours instead of sleeping. Think of it as an anarchist in your head, not evil, but completely uninterested in rules or long-term consequences. One chilling thing about the ID: it doesn't care if its desires are socially acceptable. If something brings pleasure or reduces pain, the ID demands it. That's why intrusive thoughts can be so disturbing. They're not always reflections of who you are, but flashes from the ID, raw impulses bubbling up from the unconscious. Case in point. In one infamous experiment, psychologist Walter Mischel tested children's ability to resist the ID's pull. This became known as the marshmallow test. Each child was given a marshmallow and told they could eat it now, or wait and get to later. Some waited. Many didn't. The ones who caved weren't weak. They were simply listening to their ID, the voice of instant gratification. In adults, the ID often disguises itself more cleverly. You might justify an impulse with "I deserve this" or "just this once." But those are just masks the ID wears to slip past your better judgment. Left unchecked, the ID can cause chaos. Addictions, destructive relationships, reckless spending, bursts of anger. But here's the twist: without it, life would feel hollow. The ID is also the source of passion, creativity, and spontaneous joy. It's the spark that makes you dance when no one's watching, laugh until your stomach hurts, or fall hopelessly in love. Freud's insight wasn't that the ID is bad, but that it must be balanced. Suppress it completely, and you suffocate your humanity. Let it rule, and you risk burning your life down. The real danger is that the ID never sleeps. It's always waiting for your guard to drop, for the ego to be distracted, for the superego to loosen its grip, so it can take over even for a moment. And when it does, you might not recognize yourself. The superego, your inner tyrant. If the ID is your inner anarchist, the superego is your inner dictator. It's the part of you that never stops watching, never stops judging, and never seems satisfied. Freud described the superego as the moral compass of the mind, but it's more than that. It's the internalized voice of every parent, teacher, cultural rule, and moral lesson you've ever absorbed. From childhood, it grows inside you, shaping itself out of authority figures' praise and punishment. And while it's supposed to guide you toward what's right, it can just as easily become a merciless tyrant. The superego operates on the morality principle. Where the ID demands instant gratification, the superego demands perfection, even when perfection is impossible. His favorite weapon? Guilt. Think about that lingering shame after a social mistake, even years later. Or the self-disgust you feel after failing to meet your own impossible standards. That's not the rational you, that's the superego cracking its whip. Here's the unnerving part. The superego isn't always aligned with what's truly moral or good for you. It's built from the values you were taught, not necessarily the ones you consciously believe in. In one culture, it might scream at you for speaking up. In another, for staying silent. The rules it enforces aren't universal, they're learned. And they can be wrong. Take the case of little Hans, a young boy Freud studied who developed a crippling fear of horses. On the surface, it seemed irrational. But Freud traced it back to repressed feelings and the child's strict moral environment, which had made certain emotions feel forbidden. The superego had twisted natural impulses into sources of fear and guilt. The superego's dark side is its capacity for self-sabotage. It can turn minor flaws into crushing personal verdicts, pushing people into anxiety, depression, or burnout. It whispers that nothing you do will ever be enough, and sometimes it convinces you not to even try. Ironically, the superego can also weaponize the ID. For example, when someone tries to numb guilt with indulgence, binge eating, overworking, overspending, that's the ID and superego locked in a toxic loop, each fueling the other. But here's the catch. Just like the ID, the superego isn't purely destructive. Without it, society would collapse into chaos. It's the reason you hold the door for strangers, keep promises, and resist harmful urges. It's the part of you that values integrity, that pushes you to grow, learn, and be accountable. The problem isn't that the superego exists. The problem is when it stops being a guide and becomes a jailer. Freud believed that mental health depends on balance, and that's where the third player enters. If the ID is chaos and the superego is control, the ego is the fragile mediator keeping the two from destroying you. The ego, the fragile peacekeeper. Imagine standing between two enemies who despise each other. One a reckless rebel, the other an uncompromising ruler, and your job is to keep them both happy. That's the life of your ego. The ego is the conscious you most people identify with, the part that makes decisions, plans, and navigates reality. But Freud's unsettling insight was that the ego isn't truly in control. It's a negotiator caught between the ID's chaotic demands for instant pleasure and the superego's rigid insistence on moral perfection. The ego operates on the reality principle. Unlike the ID, it understands that you can't always get what you want. Unlike the superego, it knows that perfection is impossible. Its mission is compromise, satisfying the ID's desires in ways that don't violate the superego's rules or wreck your life. Sounds simple? It's not. The ego is constantly under siege. Think about a time you were tempted to cheat, on a diet, a test, even a relationship. The ID shouts, "Do it! You'll feel amazing." The superego snaps back, "Don't you dare! You'll hate yourself forever." The ego stands between them, scrambling to find a middle ground. What if we have just one bite? Or study harder next time? Or talk things out before making a choice? To survive this endless tension, the ego develops defense mechanisms, psychological tricks to protect itself. Some are harmless, like humor. Others are dangerous, like denial, repression, or projection. You've probably seen these in action without realizing it. Laughing off an insult to hide hurt feelings. Blaming someone else for the very thing you're guilty of. Pretending a problem doesn't exist because facing it is too painful. In Freud's view, the ego isn't just a mediator. It's also a storyteller. It crafts a version of reality you can live with, even if it bends the truth. This can be a gift, helping you adapt in moments of crisis. But it can also be a trap, making you believe your own lies. Case studies show how fragile the ego's balancing act can be. Soldiers returning from war, for example, often face an ego overwhelmed by traumatic memories the superego can't reconcile and the ID can't satisfy. When the ego fails to manage the conflict, breakdowns, addictions, or self-destructive patterns can follow. And here's the chilling part. You never truly hear the ego. You are the ego, but only the conscious part. Beneath it, the ID and superego are still locked in their endless war, shaping your thoughts before you even know they exist. A healthy ego doesn't silence either side completely. It learns when to indulge the ID without wrecking your life, and when to honor the superego without suffocating yourself in guilt. But when this fragile piece collapses, the results can be devastating. Which brings us to the final chapter. What happens when this inner war spirals beyond the ego's control? When the war wins, most of the time your ID, ego, and superego manage to maintain a shaky truce. But sometimes, the war inside you slips out of control. When the ID wins outright, life can spiral into reckless chaos. Impulses take over. You spend money you don't have, lash out without thinking, indulge in destructive habits. Addiction, infidelity, compulsive gambling. These are the ID unleashed, with the ego powerless and the superego ignored. Pleasure becomes the only goal, and consequences are someone else's problem, until they crash down. When the superego dominates, the chaos turns inward. You become trapped in cycles of guilt, shame, and self-punishment. Every small mistake feels catastrophic. You obsess over doing the right thing to the point of paralysis. Anxiety and depression often grow here because the superego standards are not just high, they're impossible. And when the ego breaks under the pressure, reality itself can start to fracture. Defense mechanisms fail. The ID's raw hunger and the superego's crushing judgment flood your mind at the same time, pulling you apart from both ends. In severe cases, this can lead to breakdowns, dissociation, or extreme behaviors that seem out of character, because in that moment you are no longer steering the ship. Freud saw this imbalance not just in mental illness, but in everyday life. Look closely at people around you. The friend who can't stop sabotaging their own happiness. The colleague who works themselves to exhaustion. The family member who lashes out whenever emotions run high. In each case, one part of the mind is winning at the expense of the others. The disturbing part? Most people never realize this war is even happening. They think they're making free, conscious choices, when in reality, their decisions are shaped by forces that have been battling since childhood. But here's the flicker of hope. Awareness changes everything. Once you know the ID, ego, and superego are pulling your strings, you can start to spot the patterns. That sudden urge to quit your job? ID. That wave of guilt for taking a day off? Superego. That careful negotiation between the two? Ego. Therapy, self-reflection, journaling. These aren't just self-care activities. They're ways to strengthen the ego, to give it better tools for mediation. The goal isn't to let one side win, but to maintain balance long enough to live with both freedom and responsibility. Freud's message was never about destroying the ID or silencing the superego. It was about acknowledging that the war will never end, and learning how to live with it without letting it destroy you. Because the truth is, the battleground isn't going anywhere. The enemy isn't outside. It's been with you all along.